In 1942, a forest ranger from the Nanda Devi National Park in India was wandering in a remote part of the park up in high altitude when he made a morbid discovery. Around a small lake in the mountains, he discovered the remains of several hundred human bodies. Officials in the then British Indian colony were highly concerned with this discovery, as this was during the middle of the Second World War. It was deemed possible that the bones belonged to participants of a secret Japanese invasion attempt. Subsequent examinations, however, revealed that the skeletons are much too old to belong to a recently active military group. And ever since, the origin of the human remains of Roopkund Lake and the story that lies beneath remain a mystery. Roopkund Lake, also named Skeleton Lake, is located in a remote part of the Chamoli district in India. It is situated at an altitude of a bit more than 5,000 meters above sea in the Trisul Massif. The lake is rather small, with its size varying with the seasons, and there are no modern settlements in the surrounding area. During the summer months, the lake unfreezes and the bones around the lake are revealed by the melting snow. In between the bones also lie artifacts such as wooden items, rings, and clothing. Estimations of how many skeletons there are vary, with most ranging from 300 to 800. Despite being in a very remote area, Roopkund Lake is frequently visited by hikers. It has become a tourist attraction, with tours leading there also being advertised on the internet. As a consequence of the visitors at the site, many of the bones have been misplaced. So the state of the area makes archaeological research not a good method to find out what has happened. A better approach to gain insight into the mystery of Roopkund is molecular analysis of the bones. In 2019, a group of researchers published a paper in Nature Communications with results from an examination of the bones of Roopkund Lake. They have taken bone samples from 38 skeletons and have analyzed them in different ways. Let's take a minute to briefly look at their examinations. The carbon that surrounds us comes in different versions, so-called isotopes. There is, for example, normal carbon called C12 that makes up most of it. But there is also radioactive C14 carbon in organic materials. Living organisms take up new carbon through food and therefore constantly replenish the carbon in their bodies until the time they pass away. The radioactive portion of the carbon stored in their tissue is decaying into nitrogen over time. So, if you measure how much radioactive carbon is still present, you know how much time has passed since the organism has died. Radiocarbon dating is the best method to determine the age of organic materials that are between a few hundred and roughly 60,000 years old. In the DNA analysis in this study, the researchers determined the haplogroup of the 38 skeletons. This allows for identifying versions of specific genetic regions that are common among people in a geographic area. By trend, your genes are similar to the genes of people present in the area where your ancestry took place, and therefore one can be identified as a descendant of a certain population. In the case of Roopkund, the researchers used it to determine where the dead likely have originated from. Diet has an influence on the chemical composition of a person's bones. For example, vegans and omnivorous humans typically have different nitrogen isotope ratios in their bones. Also, the ratio between C12 and C13 carbon in your bones can give information on what type of plants you mainly eat, and, consequentially, where you live. Or at least it did so in the past, before global food trade activities put our nutrition quite through the blender. This isotope analysis was used to determine the geographical and dietary backgrounds of the dead. A bone can give general information on a person's height, nutritional state, and can also give hints about existing medical conditions, like infections. The bones have been generally analyzed to gain more clarity about the nature of the people that died at Roopkund. The general insights of the analyses are that the dead at Roopkund were a heterogeneous group. Men and women of various physical statures belonged to the deceased. No close relatives, meaning third degree or closer, could be identified. The people seem to have been broadly healthy, with the exception of 3 individuals with unhealed compression fractures. The researchers also could not find any traces of illnesses like infections. An earlier examination from 2004 found evidence that some of the dead were children and elderly. The data of the time of death reveals something truly remarkable. The data shows that the individuals have not died all at the same time. 60% of the dead have passed away between the years 700 and 1000 AD. They have died in multiple events in this 300-year time period as suggested by the measurements, and there were women and men belonging to this group. 40% of the samples, however, belong to a very different group of people who seem to have died around the year 1800. Here, the measurements suggest that they have died all in one single event. And again, there were women and men present in a similar ratio as in the earlier group. The finding that the dead at Roopkund belong to at least 2 distinct groups who have died roughly 1,000 years apart was a surprise to the researchers. When we now look at the genetic data, the earlier group, who have died between the year 700 and 1000, matches best with people from modern-day South Asia. As the site is located in India, this is not too extraordinary. The isotope data shows that the nutrition in this group has been very diverse. This could mean that they have different cultural or geographical backgrounds within Southern Asia. But it could also reflect just changes in nutrition of one population over time. The genetic background of the later group from around the year 1800, however, does not match with people from the region of Roopkund, but they closely align with people from the Mediterranean. More exactly, they are genetically closest to people from the island of Crete in Greece. Local folklore makes the bones the result of a pilgrimage devoted to the mountain goddess Nanda Devi. The pilgrims supposedly enraged the gods and were subsequently struck down. There are also less dramatic theories that suggest that the bones belong to an army or a group of merchants who have succumbed to a storm up in the mountains. What are the possible explanations in the light of the scientific evidence? Some hypotheses suggest that the bones once belonged to members of an army, but this seems to be very unlikely. On one hand, there have been the 3 cases of skeletons with unhealed compression fractures, which could mean that the reason of death was violence. But these fractures could have also originated from other forces, such as a fall or from a hailstorm. The fact that both the earlier and the later group also consisted of females and children does not speak for an army either, and the many artifacts that have been found have for the most part not been tools of war. The older group has died in several events over a roughly 300-year time span. This would be the case if the lake or the surrounding pit were used as a graveyard. The presence of children and elderly also makes sense in this scenario. However, no settlements from this time period are known in the surrounding. The Nanda Devi Rajajat is a present-day pilgrimage that passes by Roopkund Lake and occurs every 12 years. Reliable descriptions of the pilgrimage do not appear until the late 19th century. However, inscriptions in nearby temples dating to between the 8th and 10th centuries suggest potential earlier origins. The mix of people regarding sex and age would be consistent with a group of pilgrims. In the Harvard publication, they pick up this hypothesis and it says, "We view the hypothesis of a mass death during a pilgrimage event as a plausible explanation for at least some of the individuals in the older group. Probably only for some, as they differ in time of death." The people of the Achik are an indigenous people in northeastern India and Bangladesh. Other groups in the region call them the Garos. During my research, I came across a book from the Indian Department of Archaeology named The Folk Tales of the Garos. It tells the story of the Ajik people which were fleeing an invading army of foreigners. And while on the escape, in the book it says, many of the brave Ajiks died in that place for lack of food. This place was called Roopkund, meaning a circle of silvery white. Unfortunately, there is no way of telling whether Roopkund is the same as Roopkund, despite the strong similarity. The story also does not contain any information about the time when this has happened. Regarding the later group from the Mediterranean region, there are two hypotheses worth mentioning. The later group consists of people of Southeast European origin. It was suggested that they could even be descendants of Alexander the Great, whose ancient empire has reached as far as India. But it is extremely likely that the genetic traces from that time would have vanished and blended in with local groups. The data suggest instead that what we have sampled is a group of unrelated men and women who were born in the Eastern Mediterranean during the period of Ottoman political control, eventually traveling to and dying in the Himalayas. The Raleighs were a Greek business family that formed a very successful merchant business during the Victorian Age. They commenced trading activities in Bombay and Calcutta that were highly profitable. The business specialized in trade of many things like saltpeter, ginger, and rice. At one point, they employed close to 20,000 people in their Indian branch, many of Greek origin. It is known that a lot of the workers went on vacation during the summer months and went to montane regions to escape the intense heat. This would be a likely explanation for the Greeks at Roopkund, but here is the problem. The Raleigh Company started activities in India in 1851. The dating measurements suggest, however, that the later group of people died around the year 1800. And even though 1851 lies within the 95% confidence interval of all the measurements, the unanimity of the data make a time of death as late as 1851 very unlikely. It is fair to say that despite the scientific findings, the true origins of the dead remain enigmatic. Was the earlier group the result of a graveyard of a now unknown settlement in the vicinity of Roopkund? Or have the dead indeed been part of the Nanda Devi pilgrimage? Were the later group Greek trade workers that fled from the summer heat to higher altitudes and died during an expedition? As of now, no one can tell for sure. Humans have passed information between each other and down to younger generations by word. With the invention of writing, a new tool for preserving information was at hand. And in our time, we also rely on digital information carriers such as video and audio recordings. But information can be corrupted, diluted, lost, or not be recorded at all. At Roopkund Lake, something spectacular and horrifying must have happened centuries ago, but the information on what exactly is lost. With the tools of science, it is possible to gather information where initially none exists. As in the case of Roopkund Lake, it does not always solve every piece of the puzzle, but it is a torch helping to shine light into the dark.